Music by Walter de la Mare. The worn-out, rickety gig had all but seesawed its way along the damp, sandy track, between its moonlit outcrop of rocks and boulders. Its substantial occupants were perched up tight together above its splashboard and their horse's stumpy tail. Apart from the occasional grunt of encouragement from the driver, a prolonged silence had fallen between them. The immense night had cupped them in. "How much farther now?" his passenger inquired at length. "Better part of a mile, maybe." "The old mare goes well?" "Aye." "It's fortunate you brought the gig. Few of my patients telephone me until there is urgent need, and wet sand over rocks makes risky going for a car. You can snap an axle that way." "Telephones appear not to be very fashionable hereabouts." "The master doesn't care for cars, or telephones neither. He has no need for them. As for the going, it's a sight better here than it may be nearer home." There was no surliness in the voice, only a kind of tired patience. "Well," said the other, glancing seawards, "I am not familiar with this coast track. You'd suppose no mortal creature had ever visited it before. Nor had I a notion that the dunes were so steep and lofty here. It's like some outlandish desert. Strange." It seemed he might have been talking to himself. "Aye," came the answer, "so it is to most. We lie out of the way, like, and well worth while, if there's not too much of it." "Have you been here long?" "With where I am, about 15 years, and this will be the last of them." The tone had become muffled, as though the speaker were uncertain to add, "Thanks be," or precisely its opposite. "Are you leaving Dr. Brant, then? It was doctor, you said." No sound followed the question for a while, except the swish of the descending sea-wet sand from the rims and spokes of the high wheels, and the hiss of the incoming tide. A few stars were shining between the thin flat layers of cloud in the sky. "He's leaving me, is Dr. Brant," came the answer at last. "There's no hope for him." "You didn't tell me that when you rang the house bell some little time ago. Was there hope, do you suppose, then, this afternoon?" The driver drew his head a little further down into his coat collar. "I wasn't bid come then. Dr. Brant asked for you. That's not his way, and that's why I came. But to my thinking, he doesn't really want you, unless, maybe, to say his last. He's used to being ill. He knows. He's old and tired. I've nothing to say against him, far from it. He's a bit queer, though, just now. It's this music stuff that's on his mind. He thinks of nothing else. He broods on it. And so, I suppose, he can't die easy." His passenger ignored a good deal in these remarks that might have tempted anyone less professionally reticent. "I see. It's music, then, that is Dr. Brant's hobby. A composer, I suppose." "Yes, if that's what you call them, a composer. Music. There are rows and rows of these books of his in the house. Funny-looking stuff, scribbled along lines, and most of it without a word of writing from cover to cover. Though there may be words, too, now and then. Songs, I suppose. In the old days he'd sit for an hour or more together, or longer, without a finger stirring, until his pen was dry." "What does he do now, then?" inquired his passenger, as if he were a little apprehensive of intruding too much, although he had had time to think his question over before asking it. "He's always listening." "Listening? What does he listen to?" "To everything, because of this music." "But you haven't said what music," replied the doctor, without revealing the irritability he might be feeling, his eyes peering out to the horizon line over the waste watery hummocks of the sea. "I don't follow you." "Well, listen then. Whoa!" The creaking wheels slowly ceased to revolve, and, with their human burden, came to a standstill. The clock-like hoof-beats ceased, and a vast melee, as though of shouts, cries multitudes, at once filled to overflowing the spaces around them, like the bubbling and simmering of a gigantic pot of broth. So multitudinous and continual was the clamor of the leaden-gray mass of water stretching out here to the rim of the globe, it would seem that earthly night could never be silent. And this was accompanied by immense mutterings and echoings out of the starry vacancies above it. The mare, with a cough and a shudder, suddenly shook her whole ramshackle body so violently that every metal buckle of her worn-out harness rang and rattled again. "Oh, that," said the doctor, as if in sudden enlightenment. "The roar, the rocks, the billowing breakers. You call that music, then? Surely that could not delude or distress anyone accustomed to it. Well, or ill. The whistling and siffling of wind and sand over the dunes, the tide washing and ruckling in the shingle. Is that Dr. Brandt's trouble?" The driver shrugged his rounded shoulders. "'Twasn't me that made any mention of trouble," he replied flatly. "That's your word." And once again they fell silent, and listened in a brief lull in the noise of wind and water to the barking of a dog from some inland farmyard, and the faint blast of a ship's siren far out to sea. "That," he went on ironically, "was the old retriever bitch at Farmer Hallow's, that was, and the ship is making for Kellsay Harbour." "You have good ears." "Aye, and need them." "You listen too, then, to this music, as you call it?" "You'd be stone deaf not to hear it, and there are many as are. I listen only because I'm told to. What you seem to be talking of is not the music neither. Not what Dr. Brandt finds in it, anyway. He says that even this criss-cross hullabaloo that's all around us has a meaning to it if one could give it a name. What he's after is different, and there I'm useless, nor wishing to be anything else. Why, you can listen to your own ears in a manner of speaking, but you'd better not give heed to fancies, to what as like as not isn't there. There are some who say they hear voices. You wouldn't, p'raps," he added slyly, "wish me to share them, I suppose. Come up, lass." The sea foam swept as though furtively a little nearer to the track, and the gig lurched slowly forward on its melancholy journey. The doctor drew up the collar of his great coat. "Much further now. It's coldish. What does your master say about this music? He is gravely ill, I understand."
"Ill," his companion echoed dryly. "I keep a-telling you he's all but past it. Not, mind you, that I wouldn't do the best I can for him, but you have to make a stand somewhere, for his own sake. He says it's in the air, but then he could tell you the name of any bird, land bird or sea bird, you might have heard warbling or screeching, why, half a mile off. He can hear a fly crawl over the wall. He can watch even a trace of a lie in your mouth before a syllable comes out of it, as easy as a cat catches mice. Things said to him and meant only for kindness, I mean. The truth is, under the sheets, sometimes, he dreads, he is afeard of this music. You'd almost think he was hiding his eyes to escape from it. That's the truth. Sometimes, not always. Mostly, it's meat and drink to him, and no living soul to share it."
"In the air, you say?" repeated the doctor. "He maintains that this music is in the air, does he? Nothing connected with fancies about wireless, I suppose."
"Wireless,"
muttered the driver derisively, and spat sideways out of the gig.
"What would he be doing with that stuff? God help us! Do you mean what they call this jazz? Try a racehorse with musty offal. No, not that. It's his own music, wherever that comes from, whether it's what they call audible or not. Travellers say, he once told me, there's something of the sort to be heard even in the middle of these great empty deserts they tell of, out in the east there. Harps, drums, dulcimers, and the like. Others say it's caused by the heat and the shifting of the sands, after a hell-hot day, or when the wind's in the driest quarter. You'll never fail of finding a wiseacre these days who couldn't tell you whether your eyes are shut or not when you're asleep."
He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and smiled.
"I expect they learn it in these books. He listens. His lips moving perhaps, and a smile on his old face like a child asking for a slice of bread and sugar. Or he used to. It's in all such lonely, God-forsaken parts as these, he says. And those out of the ship tracks. And it's not of this earth at all. That's what he says. And that, on and off, he has been waiting for it, listening, all his life. And I shouldn't wonder if it has got into those music books of his either, all lines and squiggles, like this Persian and Chinese. The truth is, the poor gentleman's gone a bit crazy in his wits. That's the truth. Bats in the belfry, and bells. But as calm and pleasant about it all as a baby in its cradle, and a gentleman if ever there was one, and sweeter in temper and less hasty than he used to be." He broke off suddenly. They had turned a little inland, round one of the dunes, then out again towards the sea and the rocks. "There's the house," he bawled out in the tumult that followed, pointing with his whip. "Over there, where the moon is shining."
"Gad, is it?" muttered his companion. "You're right." He continued for a while to stare at the glass panes of its windows, shot with the blaze of the moon. A solitary place, and no mistake. Curious. With that silvery shining glitter on the slates, it is hardly distinguishable from the sand themselves. Are there other servants, a nurse, many relatives?
"Servants? No. 10 or a dozen rooms, I suppose, all told. Some of them all but empty. And then there's the kitchen and those parts. There's a brother. He never comes this way now, though. As I've said, except for the woman who does for the old gentleman from the village, all he has is me. And you may well say, solitary. When extra high water swims up all around us here, we are marooned, as they say. He began this music talk months, years ago. It gets on your nerves in time. You wouldn't, else, I guess, catch yourself listening too. And as often as not in the dark."
His companion, his head turning slowly sidelong, scrutinized his features ruminatingly. "Well, I'm glad you're not another patient. You must have been a great and constant help to Dr. Brent. This trouble which we now call nerves is the folly of the age. It's the froth of the life we lead, and none too wholesome at that. Does Dr. Brent ever describe these illusions to others? We are most of us subject to something of the sort. Every city in the world has its own voice, you might say. Every wilderness and churchyard, too. Every human memory is haunted by some voice, or by silence." The driver treated his passenger to a prolonged stare.
"You ask me, does he say what it's like? Well, you'd suppose at times he heard the angels singing. And at other times, not the angels. By God, no. Brassy trumpets, horns, cymbals, kettle drums, and the like. With all those bookfuls of his own music, it's nothing but his own imaginings and fancies, I tell him, to keep him quiet. Crazy, poor gentleman or not, he won't be forgotten, I'll lay you that. Sometimes, to humour him, I say it's all out of the past, hollows in the air, relics, as you might call them. Why not? There's a full-sized church under the sands over yonder. When my grandfather was a boy, he used to listen to its bells. Now, when there's a winter sea riding in, it's like an army of cavalry, cannon, and shouting. Of a soft summer night, too, he'll lie there, quietly smiling to himself. Mermaids, p'raps. Like as if he was a child again, and his nanny telling him stories and combing his hair. For people cooped up in towns and such like, such things are merely book stuff nowadays, and these lying cheap-jack newspapers. The old mare's hoofs steadily and hollowly thudded on, with an occasional spark struck by a shoe from a half-hidden flint. He brooded a while. "Mind you," he went on, "you get your ears sharpened, listening. There are 3 dogs hereabouts, all within whistle, though you wouldn't think it. and I could tell you which one of them's howling down the moon, with a horsecloth tied over my head. And the cocks bawling at midnight, near and far. You can hear 'em fading out half across the county. You get, well, as you might say, open to it, by trying. And Dr. Brant, he's wide open to it. That's the only difference, or near it, and then you begin fancying, "Whoa, Nancy girl! She shies and stumbles at that lump of rock every time we passes it. P'raps she sees things." And here we are. I'll tie her up for the time being. You won't have to be long, I reckon. Perhaps a look'll be enough. I'll go in first and turn up the lamp, though there's moon enough for a funeral. He reappeared in the solid faded doorway, and the doctor followed him down and across a wide corridor, with pictures on its walls, into a room at the back of the house. He paused at a high window. "My word," he all but muttered, "what a view! And what a tide coming in! No mistaking that music, and if you add bats in the belfry, well—" He had turned towards his companion, only to find himself alone, and that he had been conversing with no one to answer. The glass in the uncurtained lofty window sashes, with their heavy shutters, can only have slightly diminished the tumultuous reverberations of the sea. The whole house seemed to be gently trembling in the vibrations of air and water. Far to the south, along the rugged coast, a light reiteratedly blinked at the stranger. Footsteps at length sounded again, and Dr. Brant's factotum re-entered the room. "He seems to be asleep, fast. I whispered him close up. He's dreaming, or looks like it. His bald old face, handsome in a way, was as calm as a tombstone. I'm desperate sorry he's going. Will you wait here, or shall I wake him? Better not, until it's needed. There's a barrel of beer in the kitchen, and food in the larder. He said before you came that I was to make you comfortable and at home, and all that. At home." "No beer, thank you. Has your master a fire? It's a comfortless night, in spite of the moon. Because, perhaps, just now, while you were gone— Shh! Listen." He had stayed his talk, interrupted, as it seemed, by a perceptible change in the resounding churning of noise, rumor, and echo beyond the walls of the house. There had accompanied it, too, what seemed like a gabble, or rather, a remote yet vaguely harmonical babble of voices, either high up or in the interstices of the hiss and clutter of the sea. "Is that it?" he inquired sharply. "Is that anything like what he means? Yet surely that, too, is only the in and out, the surge and swish of the sandy water in the hollows of the rocks, and the wind's far-away trumpetings. Strange, though." The morose answer to his question seemed needlessly resonant and argumentative in the silent house itself. "You can hear what you like. I say that's all deceiving. What's strange in a following wind and a spring tide coming in, fast, too? It's a real bumper," he added ironically. "You'll have plenty of time for whatever needs doing. It will be all around us before the clock strikes, and isn't it we who will be able to hie off then?" "Well, you live here. You are familiar with all this, and you should know. But there certainly was a sound then, the like of which I cannot recall having heard, either from wind or water. Not that I haven't lived by the sea. Dr. Brant hasn't any instrumental devices that may not be known to you, I suppose. Things, I mean, for his own amusement, and for his own ear only." "Haven't I told you no, again and again? Apart from his old piano-forte over there, and that crammed cupboard in the corner, there's nothing else I've ever seen, and he hasn't opened either of them for months past. I tell you, I'm sick and tired of the whole thing, and shall be glad when I'm gone. All I'm asking now is a quiet end for the old gentleman, or I wouldn't have come for you. I shall be at an empty end myself, let alone a loose one, when he's gone. I tell you I'm attached to him, and can't bear the thought of his weakening and waning. A quiet end, that's what'd be his greatest earthly blessing." "Certainly," said his visitor,
but you couldn't but have come if you were told to. As for a quiet end, that's neither here nor there. You can depend on me to do my best for Dr. Brant."
"Aye, so say all the others. What I am saying is, if we have to go, why not go easy? Would you keep even a cat alive? Its eyes green with a poisoned liver?"
The doctor remained silent, his eyes fixed on the distant and revolving lantern of the lighthouse, repeatedly obscured by the tossing surf. "But surely," he began persuasively at last, "aren't we beating about the bush? All that you say, I agree, is kindly meant, concerning Dr. Brant's sick fancies of this music, though scarcely this talk of others. It is not for us to criticize what we cannot understand, and that is immeasurable. A great, rare, and unusual mind has its own pathways to follow. If they are not ours, what wonder, and what then? How often does this music, which even we ourselves may think at times we hear, as if between waking and sleeping, how often does it occur, or seem to occur, at set times, at certain states of the weather, of the tides perhaps? Why is it sometimes pleasing, and at others, what you said, alarming, terrifying? Has anyone else heard it? What do you yourself think its cause to be?"
"Answer for question, that's a mouthful, and no mistake. And you can leave what I think of the master to me. We trust one another. I won't even go for to allow it is music, more, at least, than all that tumbling and roaring there beyond the window, and which these old chimneys, perhaps, could part explain. It comes one night, and then not again. Once in June, a summer's afternoon, and that whole hedge there of the honeysuckle in bloom, and he sitting proud as a child. It seemed there was a harping near all around us in the warm sweet air, and that's what he said. And what's its cause? No more than the insects and the sea ripplings and the birds, and the breeze in the hot stones of the wall. I've talked and I've argified, and I've not talked. I've had my say, and now this is the end. And then you come along," he all but jeered, "and chatter about the weather and states of the tide, as if I couldn't draw a map of the place, ocean and all, and rocks for the sea maids. In my sleep, I ask you, how could anybody else have heard if there's none to listen, or none with, as you might say, the innocence, to believe even their own ears, maybe?" "By God!" It seemed he had almost shouted, though he had scarcely raised his voice. "That's just where you are mistaken. That's just where you are jumping, though you haven't anything to jump from. Louder, different, louder. You may think, if you want to, that it's my tiles that are loose. Who cares? What he says, what the old man, what my old master in there, says, is that there will come a moment, and pretty soon maybe, when nothing human could stay to listen. Neither choice nor power. There'll come a crack, a burst of it, a sound like some almighty threat of thunder, only music, mind you, that may snap your backbone and stun you for good and all. That's what he says, and then p'raps he looks at me, sad and smiling for all the world, as if he had gone back to his mother's apron strings again. And next moment he's trembling and half scared like a lost dog, and longing only for sleep. And he has not had any real sweetening bout of that I could mention for 3 days or more. He had been interrupted. "What's that over there, by the door there?" had interjected the doctor. "That," was the contemptuous reply. "That's a cat, that is."
He stooped and softly snapped his fingers towards the shadowy creature in the dusk.
"This here," he cajoled, "is the doctor, Fanny. Come to see master, he has. Shake hands. She's a listener, too. Look at her. Ah, she's gone."
In the pause that followed, there sounded out of the back parts of the house a low, desolate caterwauling, and then a faint, ethereal echo, as of some child's home-made little harp, and then other, stranger, more sonorous instruments, rising and falling, yet as though unintentionally, with the myriad sighings and sifflings of the sea. "Well, there's no mistaking that," said the doctor, "and it is meeting together too, and I take back what I said. There are those who talk of elementals, and they might easily be alarming, alone here, or, as some might say, it is the house that is haunted. It is a sea house. It is the place itself and its past. It entices these visitations, and so affects our human sensibilities. He seemed to have begun talking to himself. We have only a short stay in this world. We can but listen, And I say, I tell you, it's only imagining. My poor old master is dying in there. He's music mad. What's more, tide in, there'll be an end to it. And with the ebb, which should be about 3:45, he'll be gone. Shall you be waiting, or shall I take you into him? The doctor hesitated. If you are sure he's quiet and sleeping, I will wait. Besides, to judge from the look of the sea, the tide by now must be well over the track. Best not to disturb him. Look in again in a few minutes' time. He turned towards the man with a faint smile, almost as if they were old friends. This seems to be a very strange and very solitary house. Do you ever see anything?
Old as the ark, and about as seaworthy. See things? That's easy if you shut your eyes, and what's the difference with listening? It's neither common sense nor natural. And who listens nowadays? These roaring crazy towns, whoever stops talking in 'em? Why, there's not enough talk in this house in a month to last a rookery for half an afternoon. I'm dog sick of it. What I said to myself coming along in the gig was, you keep your mouth shut, my son. You keep your teeth locked over your tongue. Let the medicine man find out for himself. And there you go again, asking questions. And even now that you've had the answers, be damned if you haven't followed along the same road again. Not that I'm minding. Put fancies into people's heads, I say, and they breed. Or rot. Music. Give me a brass band or a hurdy-gurdy, and I'm with you. But all this church palaver, all this flocking up of the quiet air, this talk of voices, the whole world over, they say. I'm with the old man, every inch, mind you. I've done for him with these two hands day and night for 15 years, and he's no lightweight now, to get him back into bed at times. I've borne with him, and no nurse could have done more, nor his own mother neither, and never a word, except to you. But it will be a release for him, and I can take care of myself. As for this music, strike me blind, deaf, and dumb before I'll say yes to that.
For the few moments that followed, it seemed as if they had been listening to one another, not talking, and the doctor began softly. I'm not denying a word you say. Why get beside ourselves? Nothing is lost by being civil, even to what is round us and may never answer back. I know, I realize it must have been a trying time for you, a thread running and knotting itself through your life, and you can depend on me to do my best. On the other hand, as I see myself now, nothing could be served by pretending that Dr. Brent is merely a victim of what we call fancy, by our own ears. There had followed the sound of a slow, protracted gush, a seventh wave of the inning tide, and yet again the hoot of a steamer's siren. And then, from out of the moonlit emptiness and huge vacancy of the night, steadily gathering, as if the very stars in their courses had stayed to listen, there followed a music drawing nearer until the whole canopy of the heavens enveloping the world seemed to be welling with the vast, strangely beautiful and terrifying strain of harmony. It died away like a falling rumor of itself into the wail of a rising wind, and the incessant din of the breakers. A kind of pallor appeared to have fallen on the two human faces, although the moon must have been on the other side of the house. Someone is coming.
Aye, he's coming himself.
There followed, and seemingly from far away, yet distinct, a voice inquiring. Is that you, Raven? Is that you? You are back? Are you alone? I'm here. I'm coming. It doesn't matter now. It is only to thank you and say that I shall not want you any more. I have heard. Nothing wrong now. You must get back to sleep, Raven.